And this discussion will be led by Professor Mcebisi Lechiana today. So thank you very much in anticipation for that. And it is absolute pleasure to welcome you here, along with MISTRA's two partners in this event, the Wits School of Governance and the Nelson Mandela University. Thank you very much for being part of this, our partner organizations. Much appreciated. And for the next 2 hours or so, I really look forward to hearing not just the presentation, but participation by so many of you in the audience. I see it's a wonderful, diverse audience, and with many potential and probable insights into this topic at hand. So thank you very much. We all look forward to all perspectives being shared, both by the presenters and the panelists, and very much so the participants in the audience. Your function will be via the Q&A function on the Zoom platform. So please record your questions as we go along, and then that will dictate the shape of our discussion here. And colleagues, friends online, this is, of course, part of MISTRA's work on coalitions, coalition politics, coalitions in South African politics. Around a year ago, we published a big edited volume on coalitions in South Africa, and with a wonderful selection of contributions in that book. Professor Mcebisi Lechiana was also one of the contributing authors in that book. And we took that forward in the local government elections at the end of last year, where we zoomed in on coalitions in the local government sphere in comparative international context, but very much with a focus on those 70 municipalities in South Africa where coalition governments took shape. And in that process, we also started identifying some of the problems and issues that arise in the operation of coalition governments. Municipal managers and their appointments, etc., are not just a function of coalition governments, but we know that where coalition governments exist, there have been quite a few problems concerning the appointment and operations and removal of municipal managers. And it is in this context that MISTRA earlier this year really embraced the opportunity of platforming Professor Lechiana's policy paper on this issue that takes stock of how this situation can be improved. We know, of course, as I said, it's not just in coalition governments where this takes place. We can just think of the example of eMatlangeni in northern KwaZulu-Natal, where it's been the transition of power between a former administration pre-local government elections 2021 by the ANC to the transition to an IFP, Inkatha Freedom Party government post-election. And there is an intractable problem of a suspended former municipal mayor who is still a salaried employee of that council. And yet there's a new administration that has to appoint a new functioning manager. That's just one of the examples. Another example, we can think of the small municipality, local municipality of Ditsobotlo in the Northwest Province, where there are not just two municipal managers, or were until recently, but also two speakers, two virtual councils, and one contested mayor of that council. So it is a problem that arises in many different shapes and variations. But the case of Nelson Mandela Bay is a particularly interesting one, and one that holds lessons for many other municipalities and the legislative way forward for municipalities in South Africa. And so from my side, it's really important that we look at this as a big starting point. Before we go into the discussion, I'm going to call on Professor Kwandiwe Kondlo, Professor Kondlo from the Wits School of Governance, to help share and open this welcoming part of the deliberations. And Professor Kondlo is the newly appointed academic director at the Wits School of Governance after close to a decade in politics, international relations, international political economy in particular at the University of Johannesburg, and with very close knowledge and experience of government operations as well. Professor Kondlo, please, for the next few minutes, help share in this introduction and welcome. Thank you very much. Is Professor Kondlo online?
Looks like we have lost him.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Support staff there. We have lost Professor Kondlo there for a second. I don't see him coming back online immediately. So I'll give an opportunity later to say a few special words. And so with that, suspended for the time being, Professor Ndlejana, would it be fine if it's you, if I introduce you after just one or two sentences of welcome? Thank you so much. Professor Ndlejana is also a research associate of MISTRAS and currently associate professor at the University of Johannesburg in the Department of Political Studies. Thank you very much, Professor Ndlejana, and a huge welcome. Thank you for producing this policy paper for MISTRA and helping us to flag this issue where so many important interventions are needed. So thank you so much, and over to you for the next 20 minutes. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Susan. Just a slight correction. It's full professor.
My apologies.
Moved up the word a little bit.
One should never believe the notes in front of one. Thank you very much. You are reinstated full professor, full glory. Thank you very much. And still a research associate of MISTRAS. Thank you very much.
Oh, proudly so, yeah. Yes, well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm delighted that MISTRA not only agreed to publishing this policy paper, but also hosting this discussion. My attention to this issue, of course, it has been an ongoing issue that one has been interested in, but the importance of which was highlighted once again by what had just happened in PE, or rather Nelson Mandela Council, where you had a very strange situation of two city managers, and both of them were elected by council. So, you know, they had gone through the legitimate processes, and each claimed to be the right authority, and even took each other to court to affirm this legitimacy to be city manager. And of course, they were backed, each group was backed by a group of councillors, reiterating and telling whoever cared to listen that, yes, this is the right city manager. So it was a crazy situation, what the judge would later describe as a bizarre scenario, or rather situation. So obviously, the question that presented itself in that situation was that, how did this come to pass? I mean, how did it even happen? And why is it even happening? And even more important was, why are the councillors insisting, surely they couldn't both be correct municipal managers. One of them had to be the right one, not both. So obviously certain procedures had not been followed properly. So I got into this paper. I won't be big in terms of detail. The paper was made available, so I'll assume that people have read. So I'll mention to the extent that it helps to explain the argument. But briefly, you pretty much had two meetings. This is where the problem started. I'm timing myself here as well, Susan, so I promise to stick to 20 minutes. First meeting, 16 March, convenes, and people had been, 3 candidates had been interviewed, so council was meant to approve, to appoint the right person. There were 3 recommendations. And the coalition partners, the ANC has a number of coalition partners there, about 8 or 9. There was disagreement within over who they should appoint. And this disagreement had surfaced earlier in their outside discussions. And when it came to council, and some of them decided that they were not going to be part of the meeting because they disagreed with the ANC's choice, which turned out to be no call on was. However, when the vote on that item happened or was called, a number of councillors left the room. Remember, the NMB council, the total size is 120. So you need 61% for the thing to correct, for the meeting to correct, more than half. And however, the number that left depleted the number in council to about 57. But the speaker went on to call it, and processes happened. And but later on, others objected because they had realized, they knew rather, that the meeting had not corrected. It was only 57 people there, and it later turned out that 50 of those voted for the ANC choice of Councillor Mwazi. So the speaker said, well, the speaker closed the meeting there on the day. It was unclear whether that decision on the choice of the manager had stood or not. So in the subsequent discussion among councillors, and the speaker issued another note saying, oh, by the way, yes, it has been brought to my attention that people had left, and the number left in council was less than a majority. It was 57, this and that. And so we are going to reconvene this meeting to finish this business of appointing a new city manager. But the ANC, especially the mayor, said, no, we're not going back there. The meeting corrected, I'm going ahead. And she went ahead, that is Eugene Johnson, went ahead and appointed and but the speaker did as he had said, went ahead the following week, reconvened another meeting, and that meeting council appointed its own city manager. They affirmed the previous decision that it did not appoint. So they said, no, it had not corrected, so it did not appoint. This is the right meeting with the right quorum rather, to make that appointment. So the next meeting appointed, but the mayor was insisting that the previous meeting had also appointed, so you had two city managers. And of course, this was a bizarre situation, and both of them were there claiming to be city manager, issuing contrasting instructions, threatening staff. If you follow that one, I'm going to charge you with disobedience. I'm the right one, all sorts of things. And the one suspended the other. It was just a circus. And so at some point they had to go to court. On the 5th of April, the judge came back saying, no, this is crazy. Council is pretty much suing itself here because managers are part of the municipality. They get their instructions from council. They account to council. And so they can be suing council. So the council should reconvene, they can rescind their own decisions and then take a proper decision. So, Judge Hossein said, I'm not going to get into this. This needs to be fixed. He didn't say who was, of the two, who was legitimate, just said, council, go back, reconvene, rescind decision, make new decision. But this is just crazy because you can't have the municipality suing itself, really. You are all part of the same municipality. And so However, I mean, the judge instructions weren't implemented immediately. The mayor insisted that her city manager was the right manager, Ngwazi. And the other group said Gaba, whom they had appointed, said he was the right one. So this tussle continued. And part of the reason, and as part of bolstering her position as the city manager, Ngwazi decided to deal with the speaker because they blamed the speaker of some shenanigans, that had the speaker simply played along and not believed this thing that the meeting had not corrected, she would have been appointed fit and proper city manager. So because the speaker said the meeting had not corrected, he instantly became an opponent of sorts that Ngwazi thought that she had to deal with. And so she got involved into party issues. There were internal party issues in the national, in the Northern Alliance, which is the party that Gary van Niekerk belongs to, the speaker that is. So there were internal squabbles there. They wanted to get rid of them for their own issues. You know, small parties, each wants to be a leader, this and that. When they first made the request earlier in January or so, Ngwazi said, well, you know, I can't entertain this thing. You'll have to provide me with sufficient evidence, this and that. And it's not for me who does this thing. You have to remove someone. It's the IEC that gets involved in this stuff and all that. So she pretty much dismissed their approach. However, now that she had Van Niekerk in her side as an enemy, pretty much, she wrote back to them and said, by the way, that request you had sent earlier to get rid of this fellow, reissue and I'll act. And they did promptly, wrote back to say, NA has decided in a meeting somewhere to remove this fellow, so he is no longer a councillor, he must be removed, and now instead of taking this request to the IEC, which is what ought to have happened, she simply informed the IEC that this is what has happened, and she pretty much went ahead to take out Gary van Niekerk together with other two NA councillors, which was procedurally wrong because it is the IEC that declares a vacancy, right? And where there are legal disputes, the IEC doesn't go ahead to act. It waits first for the legal dispute to be cleared, and the IEC wants to be certain that there are no shenanigans here because they are aware of internal squabbles, this and that. These guys are always knocking each other out. So you don't want to believe the first word you hear. You have to investigate, and I think the IEC has about up to 30 or so days to satisfy itself that whatever dispute or complaint or whatever instructions they are given, it is a proper instructions. However, the city manager wouldn't wait on the IEC to do its proper investigation. They suspended this guy at some point. I think they didn't pay them or something like that. So this is the city manager now getting involved in party squabbles to secure her own job to the point of violating procedures. And so the question then becomes, why did the ANC firstly appoint Dr. Ngwazi, even though the meeting had not corrected? And why would they go to such lengths to make sure that she remains there? Part of the answer to this question goes back to a meeting that was held a lot earlier, where opposition parties wanted to remove her because she had been cited. I think it's 2021 or so. I can't remember exactly on my notes. Where she had been cited by the SIU, having issued a contract regularly. And so, you know, there are proposals there that she must be investigated. She's potentially did the wrong thing, financial misconduct and all those charges. However, the ANC brought that matter to council and said, no, let us not, or rather blocked the proposal from other parties that she must be suspended. Here's this report, it must be investigated, because the whole country is doing this now. We are cleaning up, and the SIU is unearthing all this malfeasance, so we have to act on these things as council. But the ANC wouldn't go along. They refused to suspend her. Instead, they affirmed her as their choice for the city manager position, and then went on, obviously, to push for her appointment. So then the question is, why are they so keen to not to act against this impropriety? Of course, the speculation is that they're potentially beneficiaries in the deal that was said to have issued improperly. And it wouldn't be the first time that city managers have been protected by politicians, in fact, sought out and appointed. And when they did bad things, they would be protected. And when they insist on doing the right thing, they would be fired. And of course, the right thing is for them not to entertain approaches from politicians to issue tenders this or that way. You had a city manager like that, for instance, in Lindiwe, Msengana Ndlela, who was brought in after a long time of not having a proper city manager. She was brought in and she insisted on doing the right things, refused to give tenders to this and that. They threatened them, and they even threatened her with violence. And when she wouldn't budge, they simply, yes, they threatened her with violence, and she ended up leaving and sued the municipality. So the expectation was that she would come in, she would do whatever they asked her to do financially, especially giving tenders. When she did not go along with that, they made it difficult for her to stay. So Ngwazi is obviously perhaps one of those that could have, I don't know, acted along. Of course, a probe has not been done into the extent of the beneficiaries of the deal and all that. But the mere fact that the ANC is not keen to act on her with such findings from the SIU suggests possibly that they're out to protect her. And obviously they can't protect her without having gotten anything from that deal. But however, this amplifies a long-standing problem. A long-standing problem, of course, as I said earlier, especially in the Nelson Mandela Bay area, where you had, as far back as 2009, instability, municipal instability, this manager coming in, being kicked out, and those who stayed in were interim managers, had to constantly be at the office there of the party to take all sorts of instructions. The mayor, Mapas, used to complain about one of the managers, Ntola, I forget the real name, I'll remember just now. The fellow was always, Ntoba, the fellow was always at the ANC office taking instructions, and she had no control over the city manager. He was protected by politicians, allowed to stay beyond the acting period of 90 days, stayed for more than close to 2 years because he was doing the bidding of these politicians. So this, as I conclude with the major point actually, is that with the 3 minutes that's left, is that it highlights the urgency of implementing the reforms that actually had been proposed as far back as 2010, 2011, contained in the National Planning Commission report. That is, you need to make that appointment process independent of politicians. The reason why it was given to politicians way back in 94 was because then you historically, or before that, the executive managers and all these high ups were appointed by the Public Service Commission, mainly a white institute body rather, and it tended to appoint, then they were called city clerks, from predominantly white associations. So they were the pool that they were drawing from. And you had very few Black folks who were city managers. So they needed, the new government needed to look beyond this white pool that had dominated these positions. And they didn't trust the Public Service Commission to do this appointment because it was mainly white folks. So they decided then that that function to appoint city managers would be taken up by council. So council, there would be interviews that are, and council would vote on who they think is the best. And of course, preference at the time was to have progressive folks come in, both from the NGOs as well as the academia, right? Yes, they had to be comrades, because part of the concern at the time was that it's a new government, you want people who understand the policies, who go along to implement these policies. So they brought in progressive people and all that. But over time, right, some of the appointees, appointments that were made were not so independent, smart folks. They tended to work, to go along with corruption and this and that. And this is partly the reason why in 2010, 2011, the commission said, oops, we need to reverse this thing now. It's not working. City managers are not independent. Some of them are not even competent to do these jobs. So let's take back this function and give it to a fairly independent structure. And so their proposal was that there would be, the appointment process would fall outside of council in some independent body, and they would be accountable, for instance, to a super DG of sorts in the case of the national government. But insofar as local government is concerned, for instance, you could have that function fall to a provincial DG. So city managers would be answerable to these DGs, and the DGs would review their work and would decide whether or not they are appointed. So in that way, they would be allowed space. Firstly, it's an independent recruitment process. Politicians are not involved, which means that you are likely to get possibly a competent person. Then secondly, in the course of their work, they report to this independent bureaucrat. Their reports are assessed independently. So there's no need for city managers to please politicians. Well, they please them to the extent that they implement the policies that are promulgated by council. And that's what they are meant to do, but not to respond to their informal stuff, right? So by removing that role from council to an independent body, you are likely to increase prospects of having a competent person. Secondly, to function independently and fulfill their duties. So that proposal was first made in 2011. It hasn't been implemented. And the PE case shows the urgency to implement that. But thankfully, there is a process underway now, spearheaded by Busani's school, National Government School. It's a proposal, I'm not sure at what stage it is now, to pretty much bring the Planning Commission's proposal 10 years ago ultimately into life, and hopefully they will see the light of day. Let me pause there for now. I'm sure we'll deal with the questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Nsibiseni Lejiana, Professor in the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you very much for sharing your insights and your research into Nelson Mandela Bay, the municipality, as the shenanigans, the quagmires, as you have alerted us to there, as a very important part of the introduction to this issue that we have under discussion here, and to try to fathom what the ways ahead are. Thank you very much, Safa Mitsubishi. I'm sure you'll come in again later on in a general discussion. I'm sure the questions are starting to accumulate. And colleagues, attendants, next I am going to welcome Sue Bannister as one of our panelists here. Sue is a former commissioner of the National Planning Commission, and that's just one of her claims to fame. She has worked as a senior manager in the eThekwini municipality, bringing us that those first-hand experiences of local government and a very important other metropolitan government. Perhaps some insights as to how processes has been unfolding there. And Sue's specializations are in management and strategic direction of wide range of projects and programs towards both economic and developmental goals. Sue, I can't even start to cite all your accolades and achievements here. Thank you so much for joining us in this discussion. And the next few minutes are yours for your reflections on this issue. Much appreciated. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated. And I feel like I'm blushing, but I really appreciate being here on this panel with amongst so many very knowledgeable people. So, and just one thing, I am again a commissioner on the National Planning Commission, so I'm serving a second term for my sins.
Thank you so much.
I was going to talk briefly about what the NDP says and the issues, some of it from my perspective, but mostly from the perspective of the National Development Plan. So the NDP raises a number of concerns about governance as a whole, the tensions in the political administrative interface, the big issues of instability and turbulence in government, unevenness in capacity, weak managerial capacity, and corruption. And we know in local government, we've got high turnover in mayors, MMs, and senior managers. We've got very few actually who, especially in the bigger municipalities, who've served a whole 5-year term. We've got a huge growth in hung councils. We've got massive increases in corruption, poor audit outcomes, a decrease in the quality and the quantity of service delivery. And of course, very relevant to today's discussion is that the wrong people are appointed to senior positions. But also we found that the wrong people are removed from senior positions. Often people are removed for the wrong reasons. So there's a whole range, I think, of reasons why behind this. But I think for me, there's 4 real key issues behind it. And the one is corruption. I think corruption has guided a lot of the behavior. It's about wanting to appoint people so that you can get capture finances. Secondly, I think it's about just straight politicians behaving badly and putting themselves and their party ahead of the needs of citizens. I think it's appalling the way many of the parties have behaved. It really is. I think there's an issue of competence, and I think that does come out. But I think one of the big issues is also a lack of oversight and a lack of consequences. In my mind, the Nelson Mandela thing is, it's clear that, you know, there were many people who were in the wrong, who did the wrong thing. You can't miscount the number of people in a session. So one of the things the NDP says is, in response to the problems facing municipalities, the temptation has been to issue more regulations and legislation for local government, and we keep doing that. However, many of the existing regulations are not implemented because, to stop the unquote of the NDP, we already have a lot of mechanisms in place to reduce that political admin interface and to increase the quality of appointments. We know that provinces are supposed to monitor local government and act where they see things like this happening. The Systems Act requires a number of processes to be undertaken before appointments are made and in the way appointments are made. And those simply just were not followed in Nelson Mandela Bay. The Systems Act Code for Councillors states that MECs can take action against councillors who breach the code for councillors. That didn't happen. The amendments to the Systems Act says that municipal managers and those who report to them cannot hold political office. I don't think that was an issue in this thing. Section 139 allows province to intervene, and Section 106 of the Systems Act allows the national minister to intervene where the MEC has failed to. None of these things were we have a basket of tools. None of the tools were brought out of the toolbox. So the NDP talks a lot about stabilizing government, stabilizing that interface, making government a career of choice. I think it's very difficult to be a career of choice when you get hounded out of your position for the wrong reasons, or when you're stopped from acting in a legitimate way. It talks a lot about local government recruitment and just making sure that local government has a good flow of people. We know local government has a lack of access to skilled people. There are many ways outlined in the NDP on how local government can get access to a greater pool of basically career civil servants who could work in national, provincial, and local government, and who could be drawn on, whose skills could then be developed. And then importantly, the NDP talks about strengthening delegation and accountability and oversight, and make it easier for citizens to hold public servants and politicians accountable. So I think there's a number of things suggested. I think the system is slightly to blame, but I think that also a lot of the tools exist, and I think that many of them are quite simply not being used to hold politicians and all spheres of government to account. And that's one of my main concerns, is that we have these tools and we're not using them. Again, possibly for corrupt or political reasons, maybe competence, but I think we really need to address why we're not using those. That's just, my 5 cents. 2 cents.
Thank you very much indeed, Sue Bannister, Commissioner at the National Planning Commission. And it's really valuable to hear your direct observations and sharing those experiences. For example, about this whole tool basket being available, but it not being used. And I think it will be wonderful for us in our discussion a bit later on to help fathom why exactly it is not being used. Party politics probably ranks high in that hierarchy of reasons why it's not being used. So Sue Bannister, thank you so much for sharing those insights with us. That's so much appreciated. Next on our program, we're going to give Professor Busani Mqabweni a chance. Professor Mqabweni is Principal of the National School of Government, formerly in high positions in the presidency of South Africa in various roles there. Busani, thank you so much for being part of this occasion. And Mcebisi earlier in his presentation already just briefly flagged the issue that National School of Government is also working on certain proposals in this regard. We are really looking forward to your insights on this topic in general, and specifically if you could. Thank you so much. Over to you for the next few minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Poison, for the introduction, and all the colleagues who have spoken, and thanks to Mistra for organizing this session, and thanks Prof. Lejana for putting together this working paper, which is very interesting, and it built on some of the research that he has done, and it's useful to understand what's happening at a local government level when you zoom in, specifically in a manner that he has, because the dynamics are the same. I'm sure, Prof. Lejana, you'll agree that if you did exactly the same study in another metro, a municipality, or a district, the results may differ because of the dynamics in each and every space. And it's quite remarkable that, I mean, with all that we know about what's happening in that municipality, that the problems continue to recur. For my part, really, is to emphasize that the National School of Government is working on a professionalization framework. This is a national framework that is to professionalize the public sector. And we fully understand that the Minister for Public Service Administration has got the right to determine conditions of service, of course, through cabinet and other bargaining processes for the two spheres of government. However, in a manner in which we have been negotiating this framework, which we are taking to the cabinet committee in the next 10 days, we took into account the fact that the spirit of this framework has to be adopted across all organs of state, subject to a SALGA members assembly or any relevant structure within SALGA adopting the framework and then designing an implementation plan for it to be rolled out in the local government sphere. In state-owned enterprises, it will be the shareholder ministers who will make sure that it gets implemented through the corporate plans and memorandums that the shareholder ministers sign with the boards of these SOCs. And of course, in the legislative sector has a platform where it organizes all the speakers. In that regard, once they adopt the framework, it will then give effect to it being implemented. And I will summarize a few interventions that we are proposing in this regard. But first, at a philosophical level, given what was said, in the last two interventions, you will not be able to implement the reforms. But the question says, how are reforms possible? You will not be able to do so until there is a buy-in for why you have to have reforms, and that those who must buy in fact, the politicians, the councils, and all those who've got the authority to do so, including those who hold executive positions who are appointed, understand why these reforms are urgent. And the analogy that I'm using in this regard is an analogy that says, if the political leadership and administrative leadership recognize that you must build dynamic capabilities, which are a precondition for effective delivery of services according to the plans that should have been designed or devised by each sphere or department, you will not achieve the desired outcome. Because with the case study that is being dealt with today, that municipality, like many others, are like a 1-ton truck carrying a 100-ton load. And in their instance, they believe that they will be able to successfully carry the 1-ton truck without making any modifications in the vehicle that they are using. And so an emphasis needs to be made that as part and parcel of the decision making, more in particular when you have to hire people or develop the capabilities of the municipality, that for them to successfully meet their mandate, even as a coalition in the current instance, and it's a lesson for everybody else, they have to do these modifications. There are instances in local government where you must change the tires because there are too many retreads in the system. So if you want this vehicle that we see on our highways on N1, every Friday, for it to be able to successfully carry this load, we have to change the retreads and put the tires that are fit for purpose. That is what the framework is proposing. We have to change the springs. We have to modify the Excel system of this vehicle. You also need to tweak the engine so that it can give you more torque for you to successfully carry this load that is bigger than what it is carrying at the moment. And this is a conversation that is required at strategic level. Otherwise, people will be fiddling, believing that at every material time they're making a decision about appointing people or about a new policy, and find that the vehicle is actually not moving at all, and somewhere it will crash, as we have seen in the case of many municipalities. And the framework is making that proposition, and we are arguing that the outcomes of building dynamic capabilities in a conscientious way is a picture that looks like this, where we've got people who are committed, people who are diligent, prudent, ethical, and accountable, masterful, and most importantly, who are innovative. Because the challenges facing every organ of state today, with shrinking resources and rising expectations, requires a different type of a cadre of a public servant, both elected and appointed, to think through how you deal with solutions. As revenues are falling in local government and elsewhere because of rising unemployment, if you believe that you will sustain a metro or any other organs of state using the same manner in which you were sustainable 10 years ago or so, you are going to be in trouble. Even those who are in soccer today, or who are broadcasting football, they know that today in the World Cup to be played in Qatar. The technology that will be used in that instance is going to be drones and not helicopters hovering above stadiums, trying to capture the aerial images. It's the same thing in the public space, and so part of what we are proposing in the framework is to build the ethos around solutioning instead of having people who are doing things the same way they used to do a few years ago. And finally, this is what we are proposing concretely, and we think there are game changers buried in this professionalization framework. The argument is that at the recruitment and selection, there's got to be significant changes for hiring of accounting officers. For example, we are proposing that there has to be experts who sit in committees. Currently, municipal managers are appointed by councils. Sometimes people who are in the selection committees have no clue of the type of questions that they ought to be asking, because they might never have worked in the local government space. They might not appreciate what it means to be an accounting officer in a local government space or even in any other sphere, for example. So we are proposing that you have to bring experts to be part of panels or to bring dynamism, and people will be able to ask them very specific questions to test the knowledge and not just appoint people based on you knowing them or their beautiful CVs. Induction onboarding is also very crucial, because if you remove me as Busani into a local government space and you don't induct me, I'm definitely bound to make the mistakes, regardless of the fact that I have spent so many years in the executive level at a national level. So induction and onboarding, we are saying it's got to happen, and it's got to be mandatory that everybody goes through it, regardless of the CV that you bring. We're also proposing that there has to be integrity test. As is now, a constable is asked to do an integrity test to apply to become a constable, but an accounting officer of a multi-billion rand institution is not expected to do so. Yes, it is not foolproof, but it helps us narrow the eye of the needle so that we can eliminate those people who are going to be failing at that level. Planning, performance management in local government space in particular, there isn't much performance management taking place, but it's a case in other spheres.
Sorry, Busani, if you have accidentally muted yourself. Have you muted yourself accidentally? Then we've missed your last two sentences.
Please turn your video on, Prof, so to just bring attention to him.
Busani, apologies. I think you have accidentally muted yourself. So sorry. Can you just check whether you're perhaps good? Can you
hear me now?
We can again. What a relief.
Okay.
Please, can you
sorry.
repeat about the last one? Sorry, about the last 1 minute.
Okay.
Thank you.
So
Thank
I'm
you.
saying the proposal around continuing learning and professional development is that public servants must be treated like pilots, and therefore it must be a minimum requirement or condition for them to constantly return to the simulator. The complexities of governing and administering public administration is changing every day, and therefore people have to go back. We have a challenge, for example, in public administration of about 3,000 people who do not have qualifications. Majority of them, I was checking the stats, have been in the system for over 15 years, but they haven't even attended a course and so on. So there is a proposal in this regard. There's a proposal also that why do we ask a level 1 teacher to belong to SACE, a level 1 nurse and social worker to belong to the Health Professions Council, but there's no requirement for me as DG or even a CFO to belong to a particular professional council. So we are proposing that HR, finance, supply chain, legal services, project management are amongst the professional categories in the public sector where people must be required to belong to a professional council. And finally, on career progression, few things we are proposing, including what the Soup Minister has spoken about, extending the tenure of DGs to 10 years with very clear exit clauses based on performance in between. You can exit in 2 years if you're not performing or beyond, as well as rotation as well, so that if you've been a DG for a period of years, you can be rotated. Take the best one who has, with a lot of experience, the person can intervene in another organ of state or a national or a provincial department, or including at a local level in local government. Finally, the DPSA is working on amendments to 2 pieces of legislation, and this relates to some of the things that Prof. Lechana was talking about. By amending the Public Service Act and PAMA, and well as some amendments Treasury is mooting on the PFMA and MFMA, you will fix the issues of delegations of authority to municipal managers and accounting officers in other spheres. You will also be able to deal with the issues of progression in between. The most experienced DG or even a municipal manager can easily be transferred into another sphere because of how the system is designed today. We must work towards building a single public service, and we know the benefits of those that are well argued. And with the reforms that the PSA and Treasury are working on, hopefully, and what we're doing in the framework, hopefully we will be able to move the dial a bit. But we do understand it's complex. We are not doing a big bang approach, but we are hopeful that this will have a desired impact. If Cabinet approves the framework in the next 2 weeks, we move into implementation immediately through various departments and entities that are responsible for implementation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Ngubeni. It's much appreciated. And yes, I'm sure many people will come in on some of those detailed points that you've been making there. Thank you very much. That was very valuable insight to get from a person in your position, principal at the National School of Government. Thank you very much. Audience, thank you very much. I am going to ask Professor Kwandile Kondlo of the Wits School of Governance. Kwandile, you weren't as possible able to get your activation button for voice on earlier, or your network had failed. I'm going to give you a few minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, either just to say a few words of welcome, or generally, maybe a little bit out of sync in the program now, but perhaps a few words, generally observations, reflections so far, before we open the discussion generally. Thank you very much. Professor Kondlo?
Hi, Susan. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much.
Yes, no, I got cut out. I had load shedding. I had forgotten that I have load shedding from 4 till 6:30 today. But I managed to reconnect through,
thank you.
through other networks. Yes.
We appreciate it.
Yes, but fortunately, I did listen to Mkabisi's presentation. Yes, I'm very grateful we have a session like this. And I must also thank ladies and gentlemen who've been able to join and participate in this very important session. I'm sure Susie did welcome you. I also welcome you, because as the Wits School of Governance, we participated from the very beginning in the organization of this particular seminar in partnership, working with Mapungu Bemistra and Professor Ndletyana at the University of Johannesburg. I'm not gonna get into some of the key issues that have emerged from Mkabisi's presentation, and also Busani added, and also our colleague who was in the National Planning Commission, Sue, made very important points. But I still think there is a bit more work we still need to do. The issue here is political bureaucracy relationship. And not just the relationship, but the way how the normalization of injustice at local government level through corruption of political will is a very big problem, with numerous permutations. And it's going to require a lot of detailed empirical studies so that we fully understand this thing. Because this thing is going to destroy South Africa's democracy. I see the important initiatives in terms of regulations in the public service and the suggestion to change the process leading to the identification of city managers, taking the process away out of the hands of politicians. I'm not fully convinced that this will be enough. Because in my view, this problem actually goes very, very deep. And it's a problem which, if we don't confront at a theoretical, intellectual level, and also at a policy practical level, is really likely to create an impasse, a stalemate in our democracy. And our people, unfortunately, don't need that. But I'm very grateful because I can see very interesting, workable ideas that are coming out. And of course, the problem is always at getting things done at the end of the day. Thanks. I won't talk much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Professor Gondler, much appreciated. Speaking there on behalf of one of our partners in this event, the Wits School of Governance. Thank you. Attendees, panelists, we are at the point now where we can start our discussion. I already see a few names here. I believe yes, I've had confirmation from our backup staff, support staff here, that attendees will be given the microphone to speak. There are so many issues here which I am totally sure that our panelists, Nsibisi, Busani, Sue, will be so happy to reflect on. But I am going to make it first a quick round. I see 4 hands of Ryan Johnson, Sakile Buthelezi, Sidwell Sibanda, and Ralph Link so far. In this order, and the Kungile Hlongana, Michael Sutcliffe coming in. Colleagues, let me see if I can ask you that you keep your questions short, then I will give the 6 people, 5 or 6 people, 5 so far on this round, a chance to put your questions, contributions, opinions in the mix. And then I will give the panelists a quick round after that, and then revert back to the audience. There's so many possibilities here, but let's go for a quick round of Ryan Johnson, Ralph Links, Kungile, Michael Sutcliffe. Thank you. I see it's become 4 hands there. Thank you very much. Support staff, can you please hand the mic, I think, to Ryan Johnson first place. Thank you very much. Thank you. Over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Just
yes.
if you can hear me. All right.
Just speak up a little bit, but we can hear you.
Okay, I'm Ryan Johnson from the African Leadership Lecturer in Governance and Global Challenges at the African Leadership University. I'm very grateful for this policy discussion on the Nelson Mandela Bay. Just a comment, I think that it's really an important municipality to follow, and it gives us a sign of the shape of things to come across South African municipalities with hung councils and coalition governance. I've made some contributions in the business day over the last couple of months around Nelson Mandela Bay and coalition governance. So it's very important to me. However, I would like to share 3 possible questions to the professor who drafted the policy brief, and perhaps also consider them maybe areas of critique for your policy proposal. One, I think there is a little bit confluence between or confusion around the issue of competence and politicization of municipal managers. So what are we trying to address? Are we trying to address issues of competence? In the case of Nelson Mandela Bay, Nokola Ngwazi is an experienced, very competent municipal manager who happened to get herself into some sort of trouble. So she was politicized rather than she's incompetent, I would think, in this example. But you need to clarify that within your policy brief. The second thing I would like you to think about is the corporate governance aspect of appointment of municipal managers. So for example, let's look at national level. You have the president who can fire a director general within a ministry, right? So an executive need to have an authority to somehow, make over an appointee like a bureaucrat, say a director general, to be able to make that relationship workable, to sort of establish professionalism and trust and accountability. In municipalities, this is different. It's the only structure of government where a council, like for example, can fire or hire a municipal manager, not an executive mayor. And there are a lot of implications there. How do 2 executives, an executive mayor and a city manager, sort of work together if there's no real authority difference between the 2? That's important in a corporate governance aspect. The third question and possible critique, the independent panel suggestion. You mentioned in your policy brief that the National Planning Commission did not extend its suggestions or resolutions around professionalization of bureaucracy to municipal level, and that perhaps we need to think more about that. And I think that's why your policy brief is so important, and I hope that it really spurs on the type of research and thinking around that we need. However, the pool question.
Please wind up.
I'm winding up. However, the issue around the pool of professional, competent municipal managers still remains small. You can see that from the movement of city managers from different cities to different cities. So you won't necessarily get a bigger pool. You'll get the same bunch of people. So I'm not sure how independent panels might be able to change that dynamic, and perhaps that's for you to explore a little bit more and share a little bit more. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Professor. I think you're doing great work. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Those were fascinating, important questions, and I will push them over to the panel in due course. Next, let me take it in a sequence of appearance of hands. The microphone will go to Ralph Links. Thank you very much, Ralph, for a quick question or 2.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and also thank you very much for the conversation. I think it's long overdue that we need to have this frank discussion on local government. In my view, I just wanted to raise 2 issues. One is what is the role of the universities? Because I'm assuming these incumbents in the Nelson Mandela case is coming from a particular university. And you cannot believe that a person with a PhD degree, if it is a doctor, would make those fundamental governance mistakes in that. The second one that I would like to also raise is that I think the tenure of municipal managers is a fundamental problem. they tend to, the 5 years doesn't work. If we haven't seen it yet, the 5 years doesn't work. We need to look at a longer tenure for municipal managers. I think that will sort of assist in stabilizing the pool of professionals in the local government space. So that maybe is one thing that I would also like somebody to talk about, is the tenure of municipal managers. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ralph Links. Important points there. Panelists and main speaker, I trust you are keeping notes. I go next with the microphone to Kungile Hubangwana. Kungile, thank you very much. Kungile.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. Yes, thank you so much, and thank you all the panelists. Mine is I thought the previous speaker actually was going to cover my point, but I guess it's on academic institutions, their role, because here we have a data, and Prof. Busani is actually working on it, which is a good thing. Here we have a data, and in this data, what is the real collaboration between academic institutions in terms of doing oversight in these municipalities? Because in the true sense, you can have someone auditing, for example, a municipality. They only have knowledge of figures. And when it comes to technical stuff like solid waste audit, for example, they do not get into details to such. But here you have a scholar who studies environmental studies and who has done a bit of audit in that, they specialize in that research. Why not bring this academic or institution to come and do oversight in these spaces? Because, and it should be a permanent thing, because we were having a conversation with colleagues that the only discipline that really has so much to say and to influence in our society, it's actually the discipline in more political and a little bit of economics, and but in other discipline or sciences, we don't get our scholars getting so much involved in the oversight of what is actually happening in government, in society. And we need to build that collaboration, and it needs to be a permanent collaboration where whatever work that's being done, that data must actually be used at the end by these scholars to actually give a feedback, not just for publication purposes, but to actually give a full feedback to that institution or to that government office or whatever is the institution, if I can refer to it that way. So that's my contribution.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kungile Hobongwana. Much appreciated. Lovely insight there. And next I'm going to move the microphone to Michael Sutcliffe. Michael, it's an honor to welcome you to this conversation. Oh, over to you.
Very kind of you. Thank you very much. Yeah, and thanks very much for it. I mean, I think it's important, it'd be good that there are these conversations. I had sent a note through, but let me just say it in short there. Firstly, we have a highly prescriptive system in local government already. And I think that we mustn't lose sight of the fact where the law and the regulations prescribe a process where a panel gets set up, which the council must approve. It's not the mayor's choice. The mayor might make a recommendation, but that can be changed. Then there's an advert process. There's a screening process. There's a shortlisting process. Then the council must make the decision on the recommendations brought to it. And once that decision has been made properly, the MEC can intervene, and then even the national minister can intervene. Now, that process doesn't exist in any other sphere of government that we have in South Africa, and it doesn't exist in most countries of the world. I've never heard of ideas that you can allow a bunch of experts to make decisions like this. It would go against the fundamental constitutional principle that we have a democratic system. Communities can vote in people, and if they make mistakes, as well as making good things, they can vote them out of office. So I think the first thing is, I think we must be very careful that I think, and Kobisi's research on the story is excellent, but I take issue with his conclusion that this is a policy recommendation. The law is very prescriptive, and what they did here, so my 3 points are, firstly, from what he is saying there, and I presume that that's the truth, knowing my friend Kobisi, he would have done good research there. The speaker certainly, and the municipal manager, I would hope that the Auditor General will sanction them. There are the powers that Auditor Generals have where they have not followed process, and that costs the municipality money. They can be sanctioned for that. And I hope that there would be those actions, because that's poor leadership, poor government, incompetence. I could list a whole lot of things that it is, but it's not about the appointment process. It's about other things that happen there. And I hope that there's action that follows there. The second issue that I just wanted to raise there is that part of the problem at the local government level, and this goes back to our negotiations in the 1990s, but we researched it in the 1980s, was the fact that you have today, you've got 257 different public service authorities. Whereas in the case of national and provincial government, for all of those structures you have, there's only one authority. There's one public service process, as it were. Here, every municipality has the right to develop its organograms. Yes, there are regulations guiding what should be in those organograms, et cetera, but you now have 257, and bringing them together is not going to be so easy. We've seen it already, and I'm sure colleagues like Bosani and others know that very well. To bring that into the public service remains a big challenge, and that's why I'm one of those advocates for a local government public service system, not one that is necessarily the same as the national one, but it's for other reasons than appointments. It's for reasons that you can get continuity, you can get people being transferred between municipalities without going through advert process, a whole lot of things like that that happen in national government and provincial government, but don't happen there. So those are the issues that I think we should look at. And lastly, there's misconduct processes. I've never seen that anywhere in national and provincial government, you have a misconduct list is kept. I would hope that if the speaker and or certainly in the case of the MM or any other officials that erred in this case, and if they're found guilty, I hope that goes onto the misconduct list, and that those people then in terms of that list can't get re-employed, because we can't have an instance where there is misconduct happening and no consequences there. So that's my input on this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael Sutcliffe. Those points are much appreciated. Colleagues, I see there are already additional hands going up, but I'm going to reserve those hands, attendees, with your permission. Thank you. Reserve those hands for the next round. And to keep the momentum and to keep the panel in the span of attending to the specific, not just the specific questions, but mutually the range of proposals, reminders of realities, reminders of initiatives that are in the pipeline. While that is fresh in our memories, I'm going to ask Nsibisi, Sue, and Busani. Thank you very much, three colleagues. If you could please each take a minute or two, and just you'll have to cherry pick here. There's just such a wealth of points that have already been raised. So please pick 2 or 3 points that you would really like to reflect on. Thank you very much. Over to Nsibisi. Thank you, Nsibisi.
Thank you, Sue. Just 2 points. Beginning with Mike's point. Mike, if you believed everything policies and regulations tell you, then you would have no clue of what is happening at local government level. And I know you to be a very smart guy, so I can't believe that you're literally believing what regulations are saying, that it is actually happening. Regulations say one thing, but what happens, as you well know, on the ground is completely different. Take, for instance, this advertisement, recruitment, and this and that. In this particular case of the Nelson Mandela Bay, council members weren't really involved in that process. So the mayor's office is really in charge of that process. And they can also determine the panel in a way that favors their own person. And I mean, you know, it's fine for council you would expect, obviously, that politicians would know the kind of person that they want, the kind of expertise that they want. So ideally, it's a good thing that they must get involved in the appointment of this right person. But that doesn't mean that they're experts, because they're experts, not counselors. Therefore, they can make a good appointment. They can. I mean, you are an expert now. You can surely identify a good manager if you are a part of a panel. And of course, I mean, to insist on continuing council involvement when they've messed up the process really is highly unrealistic. And it would not do any great disadvantage to how municipalities function if you have experts in those panels. Really, it would not. By any indication, it would rather improve quality, make sure that you have competent people. And of course, if you add the accountability measures that they then account to outside bodies, then you have independence inserted into the process. So yeah, I mean, I just disagree with you there completely. And to the earlier point, the first speaker, of course, incompetence is self-explanatorily different to politicization. These are two different things. And you know, so in the case of Mwazi, nowhere in the paper do I say she's incompetent. I mean, you obviously haven't read the paper. There's no mention of that. She had been an executive manager for Heritage Unit, and there has been no report of her being incompetent. And so that problem is not there at all. The issue has to do, as you rightfully say, with her new role of city manager that happened a few months ago being politicized. And of course, the fact of politicization itself is not new. It has always been there. Yes, we can easily determine competence and appoint a competent person, but that doesn't mean that that competent person, her functions will not be politicized. These are two different things. And what one is proposing here is that the new measures that the government school is now contemplating look likely, highly likely to address both those problems, which are separate, that is competence and politicization. All right, let me stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Then over to Susan Bannister. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you so much. I've still got my lovely background. I just wanted to pick up on the one issue that I think the first questioner was asking about, and not necessarily in relation to Nelson Mandela Bay, but just generally that the issue of competence, I think, is a difficult one. And I think degrees are important, and I think they help. But I've just come across so many people in my time in local government who, some of them had no degrees at all and were actually brilliant officials, often brilliant managers. And I just think and I don't have an answer to this, but I think it's difficult. It's sad that we have a system where, I know we've got the recognition of prior learning, but heaven knows how that works. Where we have no space for people like that. And I've also known people who've got tons of degrees and doctorates who either terrible at their job or are corrupt, or not to say that all people who have degrees are corrupt, but you know what I'm saying? There's not always that correlation between lots of degrees and ability to do your work. And I think one of the ingredients for me that's really critical and that's really hard to bring out even in an interview or on a CV is how well you are at managing processes and people. You can't manage a city on your own. You've got to bring your staff along with you. And if you can't do that, then you're not going to do a good job. And how well you manage that process, I think, is a critical thing. I see somebody put a comment on about culture, and I think culture is a large part of that. Can it be taught to an extent? It takes a long time to change. But I think that's something that's worth looking out for. And also, sorry, last thing is time on the job. You know, I've seen also municipal managers who aren't the best, who are kind of okay, but if they're given enough time and space to get on with the job, after a few years, they're good. They really are good. And you couldn't actually replace them with anyone better, because that experience and that time on the job is invaluable. So often we want to shift people off because they're not immediate. I suppose it's a bit like our soccer coaches or rugby coaches. There's no results on the first match, so we got to shift them and get somebody else. Often people need the time to be in that job, to do what needs to be done and to kind of learn on the job to get the best results. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sue. And then I'm going to move to Professor Busani. Yes, yeah, there you are. Thank you so much. Comments, contributions, reflections on both the proposals and the critiques we've heard.
Yeah, no, maybe just to add, I mean, there was a question about universities. Let me just say to on the question about universities that remember Enron and remember 2008, the meltdown. That even here in South Africa, the horror stories we have gone through, they were perpetrated by some of the most academically decorated men and women in the world. Many of those in Enron in 2008 meltdown, these were graduates of Ivy Leagues. Even here in South Africa, these were qualified, certificated people who belong to professional bodies with internationally recognized qualifications. And the question therefore is relevant about the role of universities to the extent that whilst all these people may have all these certificates, the question is what is missing in them? I did a very rapid appraisal last year of postgraduate diplomas and honors and masters in public administration. We are training people to understand the processes of drawing policy and writing legislation. And in many cases, these are people who hold very senior positions in various organs of state. They control $1 billion or $2 billion and things like those. Very few universities teach ethics. If it's done, it's just something this is an elective. And worst of all, Prof. Boysen, very few of these graduates, especially in schools of public admin, are being taught the art of execution. I'm not talking about project management of 5 days, but project management where people can manage complex programs that many organs of state are expected to deliver. So the university need to have a conversation around this. And to the extent that we have graduates who come through the system, and these graduates may not be able to manage some of these complex, programs that they're expected to deliver within the state. And lastly, on the issue of experts, I think Prof. Lejana has covered this. When you have experts, we are saying that the committee that is assessing a municipal manager or even a director general or CEO, knowing full well that you have no expertise amongst yourself as a set of 11 politicians doing an interview, call Mike Sutcliffe and say, Dr. Sutcliffe, come and be part of the panel, because there are those penetrating questions that you will ask, which some, Harvard graduates won't be able to run rings around politicians who are in a panel. That does not take away the authority of the panel to make a decision, but it enhances the process. And that is why we are not proposing in the framework the Indian model where the Public Service Commission appoints permanent secretaries. We are proposing that the Public Service Commission for the first 2 spheres must actually keep a list or a panel of experts. It could be even former DGs, could be former CFOs, and you then build more dynamism and rigor in the interviewing panel by the Public Service Commission sending those people into the minister who is chairing, and then you'll have more. I can make examples here, by the way, Dr. Sutcliffe, of ministries where a very highly technical and the DG is being appointed, and nobody in that interview understand what a bill of quantities is. Thank you, Prof. Boysen.
Thank you very much, Professor Mweweni. Much appreciated. And thank you very much, attendees. We're going for a second round now. So far, I see the different levels of hands there, several hands there. And I see 3 at the stage. Not sure whether Sakile Buthelezi is still in with a question. And then I see Kabelo Mokotama and Siklelo Breakfast, Good afternoon, Dr. Breakfast. Nosipo Tloswaya. Thank you very much. In that order, let me just check. Sakile Buthelezi, yes. No, the hand is seems to have fallen away. I'm first going to go with Dr. Nsikelelo Breakfast.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you very much from Nelson Mandela University. Thank you.
Yes, Prof. Thank you very much also to Professor Ntlekana for a wonderful presentation. The way I understand his line of thinking or central thesis is that he's arguing for a disjuncture between politics and administration. Now, my question is, would he agree with me if I argue that politics and administration are like two sides of the same coin, meaning that there is a symbiotic relationship between the two? Now, the municipal manager, for instance, is a champion of service delivery at local government level. So he is arguing that there must be a new political reform that will make room for politicians to be left out of the appointment of the municipal manager. But that begs the question, I mean, how do you implement policies which are pioneered by politicians if politicians are not involved themselves in that process? Yeah, I think there seems to be a missing link there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And this question, panelists and main speaker, please note those comments. And then next I'm going to ask the microphone be handed to Kabelo Mokotama. Thank you very much, Kabelo. Over to you. You just see the staff activate you. Support staff, can you please hand the mic to Kabelo Mokotama? I'm not sure exactly what is happening there. Becoming active, colleagues, can you assist, please?
I think Kabelo has moved away from his.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me then move to Nosipo Tloswaya.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was listening to the discussion. I was wondering, because in this we're talking about the administrators and the politicians, and in the recruitment processes, obviously it's a process that is supposed to be administratively led but sanctioned by politicians. I wonder if we can look at the capacity of those that are supposed to sanction these decisions to make those. And I'm taking the angle that says, perhaps even at the training that we give our counselors, it's not adequate for them to understand where they are overstepping the mark or they are using their office, the power of their offices in making some of these decisions. If we continue with the kind of training that just tells you what the MSA says, MFMA and the likes, without then making it practical, it might lead us to the similar problems that we are currently faced with.
Thank you. Those are really valuable points. Much appreciated. Thank you, Nosipo. Is Sakile Buthelezi in the conversation? If he is.
I have a question as well. My hand is up.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, I haven't noticed the hand there. Thank you very much, Professor Nomalanga Mkhize. Microphone's over to you. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Prof. I think I have two questions that are related, one for Busani and one for everyone else. Busani, I want to challenge you and think that, because I heard the question about universities, I think the government system as a whole, in terms of its own internal ability to train a public servant has all the wrong incentives. And I don't know how you would gauge the standard of what it takes to train a public servant in South Africa, say, compared to what may be required in, say, I don't know, China. I think that the higher education system is incentivized to actually produce very low quality training and to offer something that ticks off your KPAs or whatever it is that you have to tick off on your end. And so in the end, it doesn't matter what universities are doing, we'll respond to incentives. And so I think then the question for the rest of the panel is part of the problem that not that at this second phase, you see, the first phase, I would think of the training of a person in South Africa was through the fire of struggle, I could say that. So degrees are not necessary. It's the metal of the person, the fiber of the person through struggle. But in the second phase, it's not so much the degree, but the competencies and the skill set, the hard skills that are required. And I would argue that in South Africa, as far as municipal governance is concerned, we don't have a high standard. We don't set a high enough standard. So your institutions like the universities then respond to the fact that the standard is not high. So let's not even get to the debate about the quality of the discipline of public administration in this country, to which go all the tenders for training and so forth. And the kind of incentives responses that are engineered by the very system that says it wants a quality civil servant or a quality manager. I think that if we are very honest, if we look across the space and we look at just how much of this instantaneous kind of compressed training is, I mean, really, why is it not that the standard for, say, a South African municipal manager should be a degree in engineering or a degree in some actually applied competence, technical competence that's required for the job? And that we set that standard, hold that standard, and regardless of whether or not the universities produce sufficiently, but that's what we require, rather than this lowering of expectations so that everybody can sort of just acquire a diploma in public administration or something. So yeah, so for Busani and everybody else.
Thank you very much, Professor Mkhize. You'll still have another chance later on where you're going to give a few closing remarks. In the interim, I'm going to take one quick question. I see Betty Makupu has got her hand up. And after that, I'm going to pose a final concluding question to our panel. So microphone, please, to go to Betty Makupu. Thank you very much. Or has Betty stepped away from her microphone? It seems like she has unfortunately forfeited her chance at this point. Then colleagues and panel, Mcebisi, Sue, Busani, I'm going to ask you this question. Do you believe, have you heard anything in our conversation this afternoon, including your own inputs, that made you optimistic that we are possibly moving towards a better dispensation at the local level, where municipal managers will be less of a force on their own, will be more professional, more accountable? And do we have answers? Also, have we gained any new insights from today's discussion here on that interface between politicians and bureaucrats and the role of party politics in those local municipalities? Panelists, I'm going to give you about 3 minutes each. Thank you very much. And I shall again start with Mr. Bisi. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sue. Yes, party politics has a lot to do with it. I mean, for instance, you might recall there was an attempt to prevent party office bearers from becoming municipal managers. And that was an initiative introduced around 1910 or so, 2010 rather. And a group of people took that to court, as high up as the Constitutional Court, on some procedural ground. And those in the know were effectively saying that, in fact, that opposition was instigated by members of the political elite, party people, because had that initiative stood, it would have meant that party officials would not get employment into these councils. And I mean, what has happened literally is that, especially with RECs, regional executive committees, is that they think budgets of municipalities are essentially their party budgets. That is why in the Auditor General's report, there's a section of councillors or their families doing business with the council. And the total amount, I mean, can balloon to as high as $1 billion or something like that, or close thereabouts. And you hardly hear. And all these municipalities are cited, in which municipality councillors did business with the state. And it would mean that because they are part of the process, they would have influenced it somehow. They would have gotten information. I mean, I remember when we did the project, Patronage Politics for Mr. years ago, it was very easy to disqualify an application. All you needed to do is to remove one paper. And then they would say, oops, you didn't submit all the required papers. So there's a political thing there involved. And this leads me to the issue of training. It's not so much the inappropriateness of training. It's about councillors holding people accountable. Some of these, obviously, managers may not have the required competence because they are not there to do an excellent job. I mean, you look at the latest Auditor General's report, close to 5 billion rand actually is paid to consultants to do a report, a simple basic report, quarterly report, this and that. And yet you have the whole unit in the municipality set up to do exactly that. But municipalities are still paying consultants to do this basic elementary stuff. And the reason for that is that some of those employed into those jobs, which require basic bookkeeping stuff and knowing what's the difference between 2 and 5 and all that stuff. But some of them don't have the skills. And they may have the skills, however, the consultants are brought in so that, managers can get a kickback from the contract, right? So it's the impropriety within the system, and not so much poor training. I mean, municipalities don't require something that our universities cannot provide in terms of skills. They can provide. It's the pollination. It's the toxicity that is brought in by politics in poisoning how people work and preventing them from doing their own work. Last point, Tuntsigelelo. Of course, you need, no government, no municipality can function without an administration. An administration is the implementing arm of council. And the separation that one calls for, not calling for killing administration, I mean, that's absurd. All that one pleads for here is independence. Allow bureaucrats to do their job. And all they need to do, all they are required to do, is to translate the policies. Policy would say, install Wi-Fi at a taxi rank, basic stuff. Install Wi-Fi, right? So your bureaucrats then would obviously, put in place whatever is necessary to action that out. So what councils promulgate as policy is not mysterious. These are things that bureaucrats can implement easily and efficiently, provided politicians don't then come back to say, give that contract to Usmalwam or to whoever, some person who knows nothing about Wi-Fi, doesn't even know what that means. That's the interference then that retards the bureaucracy from doing its own job. That admin is linked to council, it's obvious. It did not even be a question. But the issue is independence, allowing them to do what they need to do. And of course, they have to implement the policies passed by council. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Ndlejana. And now, Sue Bannister, your next set of concluding comments. Over to you. Thank you, Sue.
Thanks. Before I'm going to answer your question, but just I often wonder whether it's politics or whether it's just corruption dressed up in a political jacket, because there's a lot of politics, but politics are not always that destructive. I just think that a lot of it's just base corruption. You asked the question of whether we believe we're moving towards a better dispensation, a better future. I'm a terrible optimist, and I have to say yes, and for three reasons. One is that I think it's good to have organizations like MISTRA looking on and paying attention to the things that are going on. I think I'm very, very pleased that the School of Government is involved and working with municipalities. I think it'll make a huge difference. And I think it's really important that the universities are having this debate. I think some really interesting comments have been raised that I'd love to hear more about. But I think it's so nice that universities are getting involved in all of this. But I think, like Nthabisi said, that we've got to look at the systems that allowed Nelson Mandela Bay to happen, and we've got to address those. We must have accountability. When was the last time that councillors' salaries were docked because they allowed corrupt deals to go through? When is the last time that we docked the pay of administrative workers? So I think that we've got to have accountability. And I think the other ingredient is the magic ingredient that really I think will make a huge difference is transparency, because it allows more looking in. And the more looking in we have, the more we can have discussions like this. Thanks, that's me.
Thank you very much indeed. Over to Busani. Thank you, Busani.
Thanks, Prof. So I guess the question is, are we optimistic, and on what basis do we argue that we are optimistic? Personally, and also with the collective I work with at the NSG, we are optimistic. We see the positive signs manifesting through public servants accepting our proposition that they must see themselves as pilots who must return to the simulator. You return to the simulator not just because you want another qualification or you want another stripe, but it's because it's a minimum conditions for keeping your flying license. And that is why even the numbers of people who are training at the NSG just during COVID under very difficult circumstances grew by at least 40,000. And the number one cause that public servants are enrolling for is the ethics course that was introduced on the 1st of April 2020. And the second course that is taken up by many public servants is a compulsory pre-entry exam, which now has been introduced for senior managers in the public service. And the framework is proposing to extend that to middle managers as well as other spheres. In fact, now we are drafting what we think will be a compulsory pre-entry course for people who want to serve in boards of public entities, subject to it being approved. Prof. Mkhize, we are correct in what you are saying. We can't, as the NSG or just even with one department, in fact, intervene decisively in this space. So it requires two things. One, department DHET intervening, but also it requires scholars like yourselves and many others who are in this platform to go back into the drawing board and look at why is it that we've become such sausage machines, yet we all complain that we are overworked, we are overwhelmed because we are always teaching, marking, and so on, and we produce, in some instances, poor quality graduates. But it doesn't end there. Even ourselves within the public sector, if when you receive these graduates, understanding who they are, what they know and what they do not know, what quality training and induction and support and mentorship do we provide to them? And it is possible because many of the people retiring engineers today are people who trained and they got experience training as engineers within government departments and in some instances in public enterprises. You know, finally, the ruling party did something and it's going to come back. It's going to catch up with them just now. In fact, in 2 years' time, the ruling party decided that only people with some post-matric qualification will be eligible to become mayors. Many people who were unhappy with it, some of them got excluded. That was setting precedents. And that if you want to reverse it in future and say, well, it doesn't apply to people who hold executive position in other spheres, I have no doubt that the electorate will punish such behavior. So that decision to do so can only then be used as precedents, and hopefully it will cascade across the system and not just apply to those who wanted to become mayors last year. Of the 4 billion that is spent by the public sector on training and development, there's got to be quality. We must set better rules. Right now, everybody just do courses for certification purposes instead of doing courses that advance their competence. And I do believe that working with the higher education sector, we can actually change the situation as is. Thank you very much, Chair, and congratulations again to Mr. Wits as well as Prof. Lejana for putting this paper together.
Thank you very much, Busani. Colleagues and attendants, we're almost at the end of our proceedings. A very important point, however, remaining. Nelson Mandela University, they're right in the heart of the subject of our paper today, is one of our co-hosts of the event, and Professor Nomalanga Mkhize. It's my pleasure to give you a few minutes, 5 minutes or so if you like. Thank you very much. Just for a few concluding remarks to supplement those you offered just now. We appreciate it very much. And attendees, after that, I shall take 1 minute to say the goodbyes. Thank you. Over to you, Professor Mkhize. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you to everybody. I think my job is really to say thank you. I note the DVC Lebohang Hashatse for people and operations in our midst here. I don't know if he wants to switch on his. Oh, we can't switch on. You've separated. You've created a class of peasants and Zoom elites here. But yeah, I see DVC here. And
I can ask our staff.
Oh, okay, yes. Yes, but I don't know if he wants to say hi, but since he's here, I thought since that's his people, his infrastructure and all those.
Can he just put up his hand so that his staff can notice him?
Yes. DVC, please put up your hand. He's there in attendees. Lebohang Hashatsele. There we go.
Thank you very much, Sipokazi and staff. Please, can you give the microphone to Lebohang?
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Sipokazi and Norma, if you can help there.
Excellent. Yeah, I can see his. Yes, there we go.
Yes.
Okay, I'm lending him one of my 2 minutes.
No, I actually don't have to say anything. Nomalanga will ably represent us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It has been a very interesting discussion. I mean, we're following with keen interest because of the developments in our own city. I mean, the university can't exist without the city. So whatever happens in the city, we do have to find a solution. But obviously, because it talks to the stability of the municipalities, because most universities are affected in the bulk supply that they need to deal with, and it creates huge expenses around how you bring in students from poor communities and working class communities, because around that is massive support. And the greater the instability, the more expensive it becomes to educate, South Africans. And then there's no new money. It's really a big challenge. But anyway, we need to find a solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. That is much appreciated. And
Thanks.
thank you, Nomalanga, for handing the mic over. Back to you.
No, thanks. And then immediately got disrupted by the kids. No, thank you. And thank you to Mistra. Thank you to everybody, the National School of Government. Thank you to all who've attended. And Dr. Breakfast for being the coordinator and continuing to really build our relationships. The Department of History and Political Studies at Nelson Mandela is a new thing. So we are trying to break from the old past and really build something new here, which is an interesting experience. So thank you for all of that. And I think for me, I'm looking at that debate between Umcebisi and Ulokunja, Mike, and I think that's really the core of the debate. It's how one deals with the moral questions alongside the fact that we have a highly technical and process-driven system. And the fact that I think South Africans have not been fully able to reconcile those two, it seems to me to be the issue. And I think I see colleagues from South African Cities Network, I see a bunch of people in that space. I think one of the questions for me really will come down to, maybe because I'm in a university, how you create a culture of professional excellence, which has consequences in the sense that you can find yourself maybe really, if you're professionalizing your public service, if you are found to have committed malpractice, that those should have professional consequences. So how do you develop a whole system like that in South Africa, where the consequences are not about what your party will do, but what about the professional association you belong to can do? And that's why I'm asking the question, do we really set a standard in terms of what qualifies to be a municipal manager or a public servant in the current era? I'll tell you that when we get these, and Dr. Breakfast knows, we get these applications for recognition of prior learning. And our rule is roughly as follows. If we can see that you lived through the hectic days of the past, and that your life experience speaks to political organizing and apartheid, and you were affected by that political system, we'll consider. But then we get these people who will say, I need to be recognized for prior learning because I was a youth league leader, and the person is 28 years old. So we say to them, your life experience does not permit us, because you have not been put through the toughness that a prior time put you through. So we are recognizing that the skills learned through struggle are different from the skills learned under liberation. The concept of moral excellence, a Tambo type of moral excellence, doesn't exist in our present. So it has to be forged very differently today than when it was forged under conditions where your life was literally in the hands of a rogue regime. And if for me as a social historian, it's those culture and social psychology and moral questions that meet the process and technical questions that I would hope that we can answer through our training system. It's not sufficient for me that a 28-year-old can arrive and say, I was a branch leader, put me through prior learning. Obviously, it's not sufficient. So I have to create a new standard for today, and I have to be able to justify to that young person why it's not good enough, but I will give someone who is in their late 40s a different opportunity than you. So it's those kinds of questions of what makes for moral technical excellence in the new period. So with that, thank you so much to everybody, and back to Professor Boysen.
Thank you so much, Professor Mkhize, for that reality check and for that vision really of education and training and how that can be taken forward in the public service. Colleagues, attendees, thank you so much for staying with us through this riveting discussion. I believe we touched on so many crucial points. We've heard so many angles coming into this. We know what the problem is. We're finding solutions, and I truly hope that the contributions that we've heard from our esteemed group of attendees and from the panelists in particular, and Mcebisi Nlejana from you, triggering the discussion through your wonderful policy paper. Thank you so much to all of you at Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection. We definitely intend taking this discussion forward. We shall be looking at particular ways to forward this debate, to look at whether we can perhaps create further documents. And we shall certainly keep you all in mind when we distribute it and give notice of further developments. From Mapungubwe Institute's side too, I invite you in the next few months to be looking out for MISTRA's Coalitions Barometer. The research is unfolding, and the question of municipal managers is only one of the themes that will be touched on. But we shall be bringing out a barometer like that, and we shall invite you to further events to take stock not just of coalition politics in South Africa, but certainly, as today's discussion signaled, very much the quality of the public service and these 257 mini public services around the country, whether new legislation, new frameworks, reinvigorated legislation, regulations and frameworks that just need to be implemented and need to cross that threshold between administration and politics. We shall be monitoring that and see that how that unfolds within our public service and local government services around the country. Everybody around the room, thank you again so much for your participation and inputs here. We also invite you to be in touch with Mapungubwe Institute at any time if you wish to bring further developments and further information to our attention, because this is such an important space for us to take forward in the interest of development of the country. Let's be optimistic. I think we've had a great number of successful, important reminders today. Thank you very much. I wish you well in your own deliberations in this field and beyond. Thanks again for being part of this event. I thank you. All the best.